Today on Gritty, my guest is my good friend Phil Mendoza. I've been attending a few of his beginner bow hunter and bow tuning classes at his Denver archery shop, No Limits Archery. If you live in the area and you're new to archery or just want to learn how to work on your own bow or build your own arrows, check out Phil's classes. They're great. On today's podcast, Phil and I discuss hunting mistakes, primarily mistakes made in the final moments of a shot opportunity. Cody Eardley wrote a great article in the January 2018 Bugle Magazine, put out by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, which you should become a member of if you aren't already. And the article is titled Situation Ethics. The article is a good one, and it got Phil and I talking about ethics, shot selection, and closing the deal in the final moments of a hunt. I enjoy talking to Phil because I always learn. He's an extremely talented hunter and archer. He's a train to hunt champion, and he's owner and mastermind of the Alpha Bowhunting Challenge. And as discussed on an earlier podcast, Phil wrote a mini book titled Targeting Buck Fever. Train to Hunt and the Alpha Bowhunting Challenge are competitive events designed to help hunters hone the ability to make good decisions and good shots in the proverbial moment of truth while under extreme pressure. So join Phil and I for a frank and open discussion on mistakes we've made, things we've learned, and our situation ethics. Big thanks to Cody Eardley and Bugle Magazine for providing relevant, educative, thought-provoking articles like the one we discussed today. Hello, folks. Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. Where are we, Phil?
We're No Limits Archery.
No Limits Archery. I was here last night.
Yeah.
You were doing the class here. And we got to hang out. And I tied my first D-loop.
Yeah?
Uh-huh. I tied it like 7 times.
Piece of cake after the first time, right?
Oh, dude. And it's beautiful. So I'm moving up, people. And we learned a bunch of other stuff on knots and servings and stuff like that. But it was good. So today, though, I'm hanging out with Phil down here at the shop. I've kind of wanted to catch up with Phil on his archery season. It was funny. I sent you your picture of your nice mule deer buck to Aaron. I'm like, did you see this? He's like, yeah, that's old news. Like I saw it a long time ago. I'm like, where was I? Like I missed this. And anyway, so I want to talk to you about your season.
Sure.
We were talking about some other subjects, and this topic came up, and interestingly enough, around ethics, shots and success, and shots to take, shots not to take. And every season is kind of full of those coulda, shoulda, woulda, kind of moments and mistakes. And so to get this conversation started, I wanted to read this article that you and I both read from Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, their Bugle Magazine. And it's the January-February 2018 edition. And the article is titled Situation Ethics. So, folks, I'm going to read some of this article to kind of set the stage for our conversation here. And the article is written by Cody Eardley. And I think it kind of helps get this conversation started, and it's a good story. So basically, he's out hunting with his brother and his dad. It goes something like this. My brother let out a high, squeaky, and wimpy bugle, hoping to rouse the fighting instincts in one of the bulls we knew to be close. Almost as Tim's bugle trailed off, another deeper, guttural, angry response erupted from the timber a couple 100 yards up the hill. We scrambled. Dad unfolded the decoy and ran 30 yards behind us to the end of the small, narrow meadow. Tim and I were trotting in the other direction to set up an ambush when we heard the bull bugle again, a mere 100 yards away. Looking up the hill, we saw its yellow withers and walnut tines glinting in the morning sun as it ran through the trees toward us. We looked for cover and ran toward it, but the bull was coming too fast. Tim dove into the low-hanging branch of a scraggly fir, and I was forced to drop to a knee behind a small pine that resembled Charlie Brown's Christmas tree. I could only hope that my full camo and face paint might fool it into thinking I was a bush as it focused on the canvas elk, but Dad was now waving at the other end of the meadow. The elk burst into the far end of the clearing full of rage. Its massive antlers arched up over its back, and the ground pounded with every step it took. I couldn't believe this was happening. I'm going to skip ahead here. Now I found myself in the thick of it. I had never shot an elk with my bow, and one was knocking at my doorstep. It slowed to a walk as it came to 40 yards. When it went behind a tree, I drew my bow. The bull sauntered out, and I put the green fiber optic dot in the pocket behind its leg. That pocket opened and closed as the bull walked toward me. It was locked on the decoy and heading straight for it, a perfect ambush. The bull was going to walk right past me at less than a dozen yards, so I waited. At 10 yards broadside, its hair filled my whole sight aperture, my whole being. I followed step for step with the bow, and right as it came in front of me, I tightened my finger on the trigger. It's now, I thought. I was increasing the pressure on the release when the sight picture blurred. The trunk of Charlie Brown's tree perfectly covered the bull's vitals. The bull stopped, turned, and looked at me. I panicked, and time froze. The bull had come off the hill nothing but angry, but now it looked alarmed. The trunk of the tiny tree, though only a few inches in diameter, covered the entirety of the bull's chest. When I moved the pin to the left of the trunk, it lit on the bull's swaying belly. When I moved it to the right, it was on the bull's neck. The neck was large and made an easy target, but I knew there was a lot of muscle, sinew, and thick vertebrae protecting the spine, carotid artery, and jugular vein that ran somewhere under that hide. I continued on up the line of the spine to the bull's temple. I had seen my grandpa shoot cattle there before with a .22, and they dropped it like Zeus struck them with a lightning bolt. At 10 yards, I was confident I could hit the half dollar size spot, but I had never heard of anyone shooting an elk there. My broadhead company prides itself in how their points can shoot through steel, but I wasn't sure of the kind of penetration, deflection, or reaction I would get. I weighed my options. I might never get another chance like this, to be so close to a bull at full draw. I subscribed to the maxim that you miss every shot you don't take. But the bull that stood in front of me was a perfect specimen of wilderness, an embodiment of raw power and fighting grace. It was the most sacred thing I had ever seen. A marginal shot will not bring a bull down. When I was little, I stumbled onto a dead buck that a neighborhood kid had shot. It was lying bloated in the river at the end of a deep pool. A broadhead stuck several inches out of a gaping green wound in its back. I learned later how an animal suffering with fever from an infection will seek water to try to cool off. The memory loomed heavy in my mind. It made me sick to picture that happening to this elk. My decision was made. I wouldn't shoot him in the neck. I would wait for him to move. A step in any direction would clear his vitals from the trunk, allowing me to slip an arrow into his heart. I shifted the draw weight of the bow onto my bones and held. It was a standoff, with a wide-eyed bull staring at a wide-eyed archer. Rashly, I decided to try to lean my body over so slightly that to the right and slip the arrow past the trunk. The instant I moved, the bull blew up in my face and tore across the meadow, sending clods of sod flying before it disappeared into the pines. I let my bow down weakly, my muscles aching and my heart pounding wildly. My brother called out of the branches next to me. His face had the look of astonishment mixed with disappointment. "Why didn't you shoot it?" he demanded. Giving me the shot, he hadn't even drawn his bow. I felt horrible. "Well, you see, the tree blocked his chest," I tried to explain. I could tell he just didn't get it. His eyes said it all. And my heart hung low as low as my head, and that I had failed. Then Dad came out of the trees. "Wow," he said, "I'll bet that was a rush." And from basically his dad encourages him, and he's like, "Hey man, you're just lucky you got to see him that close." Always an optimist, Dad's words helped. It was a long time before I could talk about it without getting shaky. At first, I was eaten up with regret for not trying to shoot the bull in the neck, thinking I might have gotten lucky and severed a blood vessel or spined it. As time has passed, though, the more I've thought about it, the happier I am that I never let that arrow fly. I don't have a wounded bull on my conscience, and Dad was right. I was lucky just to get that close to such a magnificent animal. If I hunt long enough and hard enough, I know I will get another chance at a bull like that. If I had to do it all over again, I would make the same decision. But I guess if I am making wishes, I would have planted my knee a foot to the right as we set up. Maybe then I would have shot the bull right through the heart. Cody Eardley lives with his growing family in Wyoming, and he is a frequent contributor to Bugle. There's a good article in Bugle Magazine, like I said, January, February 2018, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Phil.
Yes, sir.
When you read that story, what are some of the things you were thinking about?
Man, all I can think about was the time that I shot at a bull in New Mexico, and I took a shot, and not knowing it was a dead pine tree, similar situation, but it was a little further. Bull was about 40 yards, and I didn't see the branches at that distance, and I deflected off a branch.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not the same exact story, but I mean, not so different in a sense that, you know, those variables always happen to us. It seems to happen to us, seems to be the things we talk about. So, that was one thing. The other thing was, kudos to the guy who had the, wherewithal to not take that shot. You know, I mean, that's tough to do. We've talked here a little bit before that we started, and I tell you what, man, I mean, every scenario is so different. Every opportunity is so different. And walking away from that, I don't want to say there's no right or wrong, because you're at the end of the day, there is right or wrong in the event that maybe he would have taken that shot and wounded an elk, right?
Right.
But it's so for each person to decide their limitations, their decisions. So everyone's different, man. I mean, kudos to him for that, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, when I read it, I mean, I'm reading the story, and it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback.
Sure.
You know, and to look at it and go, oh, well, you know, I would have done this or I would have done that. And it's natural, especially the more experience you have, you know, hunting a certain species or hunting with a bow, right? At the end of the day, though, where he ended up having the shot opportunity and that came to the standstill, you know, whether you take that shot or don't take that shot, up to that, when you're in that moment, I think is, that's a hard decision to make. And we all have faced that. And this year was especially rough on me, which I've talked about in some other earlier podcasts, where I took some tough shots. I've learned a lot this year, especially probably because I hunted more with my bow in a particular season than I ever have before. So, you condense a lot of learning into a short period of time. But a question I have for you before we kind of get into the topic of ethics, you know, what shot not to take and what shot to take and all of that. Someone's reading this article, you know, what are some things that you would do different in terms of, you know, the bull's coming off the hill, he's 100 yards away, and you're scrambling. How are you going to set up?
So me personally, one of the things that, you know, he said he mentioned he kneeled behind the tree and it was kind of a last minute ditch effort. Honestly, when there's a lot of action or activity going on, I hardly ever like to get to my knees or sit down, because if you need to move, if you need to shift positions, I mean, from a standing position, you can rotate quite a bit around if you have to, right? From a kneeling position, you're limited. From a seated position, you're even more limited. So that's one of those things that personally, even if I was in a similar situation where I may stand next to a tree as opposed to kneel next to a tree, that was one thing that, and I know, like I said, in the heat of the moment, things happen and you just make the quick decision. Not judging the guy, but
right. It's
just, I usually like to stand. That's personal. Yeah. But there again, I did a tally a year and a half, 2 years ago. I did a seminar, and I did a tally from the previous 10, 12 years of animals that I shot that I can recollect. Most of my shots were from my knees, right? So, but there again, it's just knowing there's so many moving parts. I just like to try to be mobile.
Yeah, that's same thing. Like you said, I've learned now getting stuck. So Corey Jacobson has said this many, many times on this podcast, and I've heard him say it in other places, that he hates to stand behind an object. And so that's what the camouflage is for. Mm-hmm. You know, it's because it's really tough when you have something in front of you, you know, to get that shot. And, you know, he spoke in the article about how as soon as it stepped behind a tree, he drew his bow back. So especially where there's cover, you know, and get in front of the tree. Sure. Is what I think. Then that tree's not in your way, which is, I believe, the very tree that caused him the problem was the one he hid behind. So, you know, it's so natural for us to like jump behind an object to hide. Yeah. It's so counterintuitive to stand out in front of it. And yet, so you have to fight your natural instincts, because you're like, I'm standing right in the open, like he can see me. But I'm blown away after having done that. Like, if you're standing in the middle of an open field, you're kind of screwed.
Sure.
But if there's trees and brush and cover, stand in front of a tree or next to a tree, and those animals in your camouflage, they often just don't see you.
Right. It's, even to the extent where, one of the classes that we've been, offering here, one of the things that we teach is shot sequence, having a shot sequence. And one of those things being when you preload your bow or you're getting ready to draw your bow back, a lot of times I'm telling people, raise your bow initially, towards the target to where you can just draw straight back. I'll hide behind my bow a lot of times when there's animals, right? Yep. Because it's just enough cover to break up your silhouette or to give a little bit more to where it's not so much a human outline. Yep. That bow gives you a little bit of
object that's kind of all different kind of angles with an arrow off the point and up the end. And
I've sat there and videoed animals sometimes that I wasn't going to shoot, where I'd have my bow and I just rest my camera on top of the limb and I'm just kind of videoing and just out in front of an object. But like you said, the camo, I'll trust my camo for the most part if you're using it right. And, those are a couple things that.
Yeah. And I think so standing in front of it and then stay standing, like you said, like it's tempting to get down on your knees. But sometimes you're at full draw and you just need to inch a bit left or right and you got your shot. But from your knees, there's no inching.
No,
there's no slowly. You're lurching.
Yeah.
And it's not good. So I agree. We're thinking the same thing. And I think, don't get me wrong. I've done the same thing that he did 10, 20 times.
Sure.
That's why now in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, don't do that. Get in front of the tree, stay standing when you can. And, the other thing was, cause he would have easily been able to get to full draw as it went behind a tree, but then he wouldn't have had anything blocking him. And this year when I was hunting with Aaron, he was calling in a bull for me. And unfortunately, the same scenario, the bull just started coming before Aaron dropped back into the trees just a little bit. I was in the process of, getting situated when Aaron made a bugle. Timing was I just needed like 30 more seconds, 40 more seconds. Well, all those elk just jerked their head up and looked, and I'm like, I'm behind like two big trees. I'm like, and they're coming in from a meadow. And I'm like, I am completely blocked in here. And now I can't move because they are locked on the trees. And the bull comes really, really close, like to 20 yards but I'm stuck behind the tree. So again, sometimes that'll just happen.
Sure.
It's not how I would normally set up. And I also wouldn't set up so I was directly in line with the caller. I'd want to get to where I'm off to the side. So they wouldn't be looking through me at the caller, So some of that is communication with your hunting partner and, planning that out. But I think, what about, he said it looked like it was going to pass within 10 yards of him. So he waited for that opportunity.
Yeah, excuse me.
Because he had the fiber optic pin, he said, right in the pocket there as it was moving. What do you do?
So personally, I think he said that was out there. I don't remember if this is the same article, about 40 yards when he initially drew back or something to that extent. But he's following the animal, and granted, moving shots are a questionable shot, right? If an animal is walking, as opposed to moving quickly
or trotting,
right? So understanding the circumstances, I've shot elk on a slow walk when they're kind of creeping in, right? They're moving, but they're not on a fast paced walk. Yeah. So if they get into where I'm in that 25 to 20 yard range in what I call my inner third, I'll look at that shot, in a broadside situation. Quartering to frontal shot, that's not there yet in a moving situation. But if it's left to right, I'll entertain that shot personally, because to me, it's close enough to where, in a big enough animal like an elk, not likely that he's going to duck the string to the extent where
a whitetail or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Whitetail deer, antelope. Yeah, no, I've shot antelope out of a ground blind real close that were kind of walking slowly to the water, and bad news, Yeah. So yeah, each scenario is different. And at that moment, just being able to stay engaged and make that decision is really critical.
I like you. I think you said it the other day that you don't wait for a better shot when you have a shot.
Correct.
And in this scenario, for me, I'm now more aggressive in that moment. So if an elk was coming in, he's coming in pretty hot, but he looked like he was going to stop within 10 yards of me, but he's at 20 or 30. Like, I know I can make that shot.
Sure.
Like, there's no need to wait for him to get to 10.
Right.
And there's a lot that can go wrong between 30, 20 yards and then 10 yards.
Correct.
In that window. So for me, I'm like, as soon as he steps into an opening and I know that's a 20-yard shot and he's going to step into that opening, I'm already in the opening. And as soon as he gets there, I will give a sharp cow call right then, like, meow, because I've done the softer ones in the past, like, meow, and they just keep on walking like they don't give a crap. Like, they've heard cow calls a million times. They don't even like turn their head. But when you give them sort of an alarmy or like asterisk intense cow call, I've seen them just stop,
lock up
and look, and you just punch them right there.
See, I tell you, and so it's all a matter of perspective and knowing your limitations too, because at the same token, if somebody's effective range, maybe it's 30 yards or they're shooting a stick bow, right? Yeah. And maybe they have to wait for that 15-yard shot or 20-yard shot to get in their comfort zone. Another, like I said, different scenarios, animals. I had a situation a couple years back where I'm whitetail hunting and pre-rut, deer were just starting to rut, and I'm on a trail it's 25 to 18 yards depending on where you look at and here comes a doe running, right? And I had my bow in hand, I'm sitting there. It took about 5 minutes, but a buck finally came after her because she was on the move, and he's grunting, and his nose is on the ground, and I drew my bow as soon as I seen him about to come into the trail, the opening. So I followed him from one. I saw him where I had an opening, and he was on a constant move. I barked at him 3 times, and then he was about to dip into the opening right at 18 yards, and he wasn't on a fast pace, but I yelled at him, hey, and he kind of just enough to slow down, picked his head up, and I thumped him. Yeah. And I heart shot him there. But it was because if he was on the pace that he was moving initially, I was a little too fast to take the shot. But when I literally yelled at him and he slowed his pace and he almost picked his head up off the ground, it's just enough to make the shot. But some people would have passed because it would have been apparent that it's moving too quickly. So each animal scenario is different. Your comfortable effective range, wind, right. So many things can come into play. So it's interesting. It's the topics that we talk about, right? I mean, that's where, the pro shop here that I sometimes come in when I don't have to work and I'll just come and talk with people about hunting stories. Yeah. Because those kind of things are how we learn. We learn from other people's mistakes and not saying it in a, trying to shed light on it, but it's just, that's how we learn. No, the same thing, a similar story. Like, I feel his pain because, when I was hunting in North Idaho, Aaron and I it was pouring rain, and we got into some elk, and Aaron hung back and bugled, and an elk it was all, the elk could see quite a ways, and I was kind of stuck out in the open. Like, I knelt down on a trail, instead of getting next to a tree or near a tree or in front of, I was just in an open 10 by 10 space where there was nothing. As I was walking up the trail and I saw the bull, and I slowly just inched to the ground. Right. Well, now I'm caught out kind of just on this trail as the bull is coming down the hill, and he's coming in to this call to Aaron and Aaron's over the bluff, just below. So the bull can't see till he gets real close. The bull is behind a ridge for me. Like, I can see him at first, and then I can see his head. So he can look and see me, but I can't see his vitals. And he's just walking the whole time along this ridge and getting closer and closer and closer. Then he pops over the hill, but I'm so close that I can't get the full draw. Spot me in a second. But there's a cluster of trees. So as soon as he goes behind that and his head's out of the way, I'm going to draw. So I do. I draw my bow back as soon as he goes behind a tree, and I'm thinking, this bull is so dead. He's 22 yards away. Like, you're dead. And that darn bull stops. And while I'm at full draw, he just sits there behind the cluster.
with his head blocked, right? But I can't find anything to shoot. Like, yeah, I could maybe take a liver shot just behind the last rib. I could shoot at his neck. I could shoot at his flank. There's like all these different areas where, but I'm like, they're all like him, like this guy in the article. They're all low percentage shots. And we're in North Idaho. It's thick. It's not like some other places where I've hunted, like Arizona, where you watch them run off a half a mile and you can still see them. Right. This bull needs to drop quick if I shoot him and it's pouring rain and finding a blood trail and tracking it. Like, I need this shot to be a good, clean shot.
Sure.
And he leaves me at full draw for a long time. And then finally he takes a couple of steps and then he just kind of is still behind the tree and I'm just waiting. And finally I'm like, I can't hold my bow back. It's getting tiring. And I lower the bow down a little bit and the bull trots out into the open and then looks right at me. Like, I don't know what it was. Like, he just turned his head and looked, and he's like 19, 20 yards now. But my freaking bow is pointed at the dirt, as I'm resting it kind of on my leg, I'm like, I'm tired of holding it up.
Yeah.
I didn't know how much longer I was going to have to hold it, right? And I didn't want to let down. Anyway, now I'm stuck. And I've been at full draw for a bit, and that bull is looking at me. And in hindsight, I think I'd have been better off just holding my bow back, just manning up and just sitting there and waiting until either I couldn't do it anymore and I had to let down. But he had me pegged. And so what I did is, like this guy, after a while, I was frustrated and I was like, you got to be kidding me, and I slowly tried to raise my bow up while he's looking and it was gone. And I think I'd have been better off just seeing if I could hold out longer. But the other thing I've said before is I'd have been better off if I just held at full draw. I could still go another minute and a half. And when he stepped out, I'd have drilled him. Yeah. And that's what I should have done. Is just stayed in the game instead of resting. And since then I've timed myself. I can sit for a little over almost 3 minutes at full draw and still make a good shot.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean, I've had many experiences as well that it's frustrating. Hunting can be so frustrating, but what do? You chalk it up to experience and you move on, because there's the variables that animals throw at you. Like you said, you could have, your best intention could have been to get by that tree or the next cluster of brush or whatever the case is. But where you happen to see that animal, it was there. And if you would have maybe moved to that cluster, maybe it would have picked you off and you would have never got that close to it. So you can play the what if game all day, and it's fun to play it sometimes because, you can learn from it.
Yeah.
But other times it's comical too, because you just got to sit back and laugh because, I mean, what do you do?
It's just what hunting is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that we've sort of analyzed this whole what he could have done in the article, and then let's get back to the whole should you take the shot, not take the shot ethic discussion, because there were shots this year. I mean, we talked about this offline a little bit because we discussed on Gritty Bowman podcast, Aaron Snyder, myself, David Brinker from Sitka, and Brian Broderick from Lost Arrow Films. We were on our mule deer hunt in Alberta, and we discussed kind of a recap of the season in general and a lot of the missed shots or shots that didn't pan out. And I got a lot of comments, on it, because we were really open about, hey, some of our worst moments, on the archery hunts. And there were comments where people were like, it's super easy. It's super easy, guys. Either you can make the shot and you're 100% sure you can make it, or you don't take it. And when I hear that, I'm just like, well, you tell me what you think.
I think that there's shots that you can be 90, 95% confident that you can make that shot. there's no 100% guarantee on anything, right? And at least that's what I feel.
Yeah.
Because there's so many, like I said, there's so many moving parts to what is you and your bow and the animal and moving and the elements of nature and everything, right?
Yeah.
There's so many moving parts that maybe that situation plays itself out 10 times and you kill 10 out of 10. Because yes, you are 95, 98% confident it can happen. But what happens when that one time when you're about ready to cut that shot loose and maybe a coyote just comes hauling butt across the field and spooks that deer or, puts that deer on alert. And now instead of that deer being calm and relaxed, now the deer's on alert or that antelope, whatever the case is. So I can't say that there's any time I've had multiple situations that repeated itself.
Yeah.
There have been situations that are similar, but nothing's ever repeated itself.
Got a unique set of variables.
Yes.
Things are always a little bit different. The animal's a little different. Weather, wind.
I think that you just train to be as confident. You prepare to be as confident as you can be and try to understand what your limitations are and how they're going to follow through with whatever game you're chasing and make the best call you can at that moment in time because we've all been wrong, right? I can tell you that the end of my season last year was, well, not quite the end of my September season. It was heartache and it was very hard to stomach based off a decision that I made. Mm-hmm. And, moving into this year, so much of what I'm preparing for this year was based off that experience. And even when I thought about that experience afterwards, it's like, I take that shot again. I'll take it again, but maybe it's just that one time or maybe I just need to reevaluate my limitations, but I don't know, right? It's things that we need to continually evolve as hunters and always try to get better. Because if we ever say, I can make that shot every time, maybe 4 or 5 more times you do make it, but maybe the time after that, things don't go your way.
For me, I think, first of all, I agree. There's no shot that's 100%. And if you think that, you're naive. I've missed shots that you would think no one should miss. One of the biggest bulls in Oregon I ever got to in close was I could spit on it and I still missed. I hit a branch and it just went into his antlers and it was all she wrote. I even took the shot with so much surety that's why I missed. It's it's a done deal. Yeah. I was already jacked and excited because he was dead. And then I hit this little tiny 1-inch nub off of or 2-inch, branch off of a little tiny dead tree right about 2 inches from the tip of my broadhead. And my hand was blocking my bow. I was focused on the target. I didn't see it. And the arrow hit that tiny little thing and went off. It was had I just, paid a little more attention, I heard years ago on some Primos video, they were talking about the number of animals missed at less than 10 yards is almost the same number that's missed at over 40 yards. It's what? How do you miss a 10-yard shot and under? And they were talking about with whitetail from a tree stand, and it made me wonder about that. And so to me, though, there's no shot that's guaranteed. There's none.
I agree.
And so when you're out there hunting, though, this is the other thing. The people I know that are the best, that get it done every year, they're people that are balancing. So, for example, when I was in Texas hunting whitetail, that buck that I killed, he stood up in a dense thicket. A dense plum thicket. And there was about 2 feet or so of branches in front of him before the arrow would hit the target. And I even lean over at full draw and I'm and Casey Harbertson is behind me running the camera. You can hear me lean over to Casey and go, should I take the shot? Because I'm analyzing this and going, I'm fairly certain at 20 yards with my fixed blade broadhead and what I've got and where I'm aiming, I'm going to punch through and kill this deer, right? Back to the whole question that you were saying about variables. You don't get a perfect shot opportunity. You don't. Most of the time you don't. And so I'm weighing that, okay, I got a 20-yard shot, spot and stock on a mature whitetail buck. I'm at full draw. I mean, this is about as good as it gets.
Sure.
Okay? So do I pass on that shot because the branches are there? Or do I take the shot? If I pass on the shot, I'm 99% sure this buck gets away. He's looking right at me, right? It's now or never. For me, I'm looking at what I think I can do, what I think the odds of me succeeding are. And I'm using my best experience and judgment to make that choice. And it's not 100%. It's not guaranteed, but it's damn close.
Sure.
And then I pull the trigger. I mean, I do it.
I think, and similar evaluation, the way I feel anyway, is if you get to that point where you've evaluated the variables, the situation, the animal, you're at full draw, and you say, yes, I'm going to take this, or I can make this shot. Okay, well, you've used what is your gut instinct. You've used whatever you're able to compute at that time and break down the situation. So at that point, you take the shot and you live with the results, right? Mm-hmm. You take home an animal, maybe you miss, maybe you wound it. But at that point, I think that you just got to know that once you get to that point, you just got to live with it, and learn from it, because not every time is it going to work out great. Not every time are you going to, miss or have a bad experience. But I think that if I've done my kind of short, or whatever the case, depending on the scenario, evaluation situation, like, yeah, I'm going to make this shot. I'm confident enough to know that because I've prepared, the doubt doesn't creep into my mind. None of that comes into play. After the fact, if it doesn't go well, it sucks. It hurts.
Yeah.
But because you just proved yourself wrong, right? All the thousands of arrows or whatever the case is, the detailed to equipment and everything else, and it didn't work out. But at that point, I think that you still got to be able to confidently get to that point and make that decision. Because like you said, if you wait for the perfect situation, you may shoot 10% of the animals that you've actually killed, right? Maybe 5%.
Absolutely. That's pretty much what I'm getting at is that I get a lot of that from people, from time to time. Like I that wasn't ethical, or I wouldn't take that shot. And it's like, well, it worked. And the same is true where I've made a mistake and I'm like, okay, that, like you said, like you live with that. And now looking back, with this kind of, this whole package of experience that a guy has gathered, I'm looking at it and there are shots now that I won't take, that I've taken in the past because I know my limitations better now. I know what they are, and that's humbling. And as I move forward, though, it doesn't mean though I'm only shooting when I'm 100% sure. And I think that's part of hunting. That's what it's about. It's like, okay, he's 40 yards. I know exactly, he's calm. I know exactly the yardage. There's a branch going diagonal across his vitals, but it looks like I'm going to clear that branch, and that branch and I'm going to nail him right in a perfect spot. It would be great if the branch wasn't there.
Sure.
But it's like, I've trained for this.
Yeah.
I can make that shot. If you hit the branch, the arrow's deflected. Maybe it goes in the animal, maybe it misses altogether. But it's like an assessment you're making. You're not just you're weighing out all those options and you're doing it. And for me, I feel like there's a lot of guys out there that and I'm not encouraging people to take any shot they're not comfortable with. But I do hear that statement like, well, if there's that branch in the way, I'm not doing it. And I feel like that's okay for that guy. For me, I just don't have this kind of like view that it's going to be perfect every time.
No, I agree. And yeah, I don't know. I think that there's so many things with archery that from practice, how it follows through to what happens in the field. Because again, if you allow doubt to creep into your mind when you're about to release an arrow, I mean, I always try to teach people, and this is something that was taught to me, and I had to learn over time. But it was, if you allow doubt to creep into your mind, well, let down and start over, right? Why are you going to take a shot? In a hunting situation, it's the same thing. If you go through your system or your process and you analyze what's going on, and you're 100%, or you're as confident as you can be at that point, yeah, I can make that shot. Take the shot. If you get to that point, you're like, I don't know. Well, maybe it's not worth taking, because if you don't know before you even draw your bow back, and then you start to try to settle a pin on that animal in that situation, and you let that doubt creep in your mind, you're probably going to make a bad shot, or it's probably not going to go off as well. And then what's going to happen? It's going to just crap rolls downhill, man. You're just going to, one thing after another, you're going to beat yourself up. Confidence is going to go down the tubes, and it's not worth it. And it's, I mean, I don't know if in the camera, the buck that's behind you.
Yeah. That
afternoon, the morning before I shot that buck, I had a 200+ inch mule deer in my sights within range, but it was frontal. And it was at a distance that was just a touch outside what I was comfortable shooting at.
Yep.
And one might think, how many times you get a 200+ inch mule deer in your sights, right? Not a lot. I mean, I don't know public land where we were hunting, it
never happened to me. Let's put it that way.
It was a perfect storm because we didn't think that deer was there. I was chasing another deer. Long story short, the deer comes out, and I came to full draw, and I started to settle my pin on it, and I can just see a couple branches between me and the deer that I felt, I don't know if it's going to hit that branch, but it could. The last thing I want to see is a deer wounded on a frontal shot because of stupidity, right?
Yeah.
So I passed on the shot, and that afternoon we spotted this deer laying down, very similar distance to the situation in the morning. In my binoculars, I can see through the grass because it was laying there that its elbow appeared to be a little bit forward, not really tucked back.
Right.
So I'm like, I can slip that shot in there. I can shoot him laying down. When I drew my bow back, I can't see the same. I see grass, and I see the top half of the back of the animal. Right. But because I knew from the binos where he was laying and he hadn't moved, I was confident to take that shot, and the result was good. But at the same time, because the way that the process worked out, man, I'm happy with what happened. But the story of, hey, I could have.
Right. You could have shot a 200-inch buck and not ended well. But at the same time, like with this deer, it's not, you're still shooting through grass.
Correct.
You're still like putting an element of sort of faith into this shot and your ability, and you're assessing a situation, and you're taking a chance. A calculated risk, but it's still a risk.
Some people don't like to shoot animals bedded. That's another, like I said, I'm not afraid to, the situation I talked about before where last season ended badly. It was on a frontal shot on the biggest bull that I've been able to get an arrow into. And for some people, it was a 330, 340 class bull, which was the biggest bull that I've been able to draw back on and actually, connect with it with an arrow. And it was at a distance that was, within my first third of where I have my system, and I felt confident taking that shot, and it stood there, and when I shot, it was just a little bit on the hill above me, and when it started to crouch, when the arrow went in, I just feel like it went in high in the vitals. And one would think, well, you hit him frontal, and I did hit him frontal, and we found some blood, and we tracked him for a while, and he hit a wallow about 3/4 of a mile away, which was a ways, and he rolled around, and we lost blood. So it was one of those things where I went back the next day, I went back the next weekend and looked, and that ended my season. But when I think about it, it's like, okay, well, I've shot many animals before frontal, and I'll take the shot again. It's not that it's a very lethal shot if in the right circumstances, but I just feel like that one time there, it taught me something. It was one of those things that I really had to sit and analyze that situation, work backwards to not let that happen again. Because for one, I do believe that animal died. I punched my tag on that. That was one of those where, I'm done, because to see you're trying to kill the most mature animal you can. I feel that was one of the best specimens on that mountain that year. And I put an arrow in him. I played the game. I got close enough, got a shot. It didn't work out. But it was one of those things that, like I said, when I sit and evaluate things, working backwards, it teaches us, man. And it teaches us that we're not perfect, that there is no 100%. There is, I tweak my bow setup a little bit. I tweak my arrow setup a little bit. I tweak my fletching setup. I got so, worked up down a rabbit hole with noise and trying to have as quiet of a setup as I can and all those things. I really started to fine tune, analyze things and it's good. I mean, I had a great season this year.
It's like, you just evolve a little bit. Yeah. Every time you learn. That's kind of how, like, feel like, I've been hunting for, most of my life since I was a kid. I went on hunts with my dad, but there were gaps in time, like in college and stuff, and where I didn't hunt at all for years. But I feel like there's a condensed amount of learning I've done in the last few years since I've been more heavily involved with because of Gritty. And in that period, I've learned a lot in a short window, and all my mistakes are pretty much out there for the viewing, but at the same time, so are the successes. And, I took that shot in Montana this year on an elk from the ground blind in heavy wind. And for those that followed that story, I wounded a bull, and most likely not fatally at all. But still, it's a bad feeling, know, and the bull, ran off, and I learned a lot from that. And in hindsight, or if I were to repeat that again, you're talking about, you'd probably take that shot again. There's some shots where, I'd take that shot again because I've taken that shot 10 times and it's worked. But all of a sudden, this one time, the animal just moved or dodged or something wasn't quite the same. But I'd still take that again because I know this is a shot in Montana where I wouldn't take it again. It was too windy. I would have waited till the bull was closer, and I would pass. I would gamble on the chance of not getting the shot rather than try to make that shot. And I think that's where I'm at now with a lot of situations is, I'm much more content with myself saying I would rather risk not getting a shot and the animal getting away than hurt the animal or wound the animal and go down that road. And, I'd rather just wait. And Broderick said something, my friend Brian Broderick said something that was poignant that I've thought about. He's like, a lot of times when you do wait, a situation does arise where the shot is better and you actually get that animal, if you just are patient. And so that's kind of the spot I'm in now. Like, if I just don't feel good about the shot or comfortable with it, it's like, that's fine. I'm going to wait. I'm going to bide my time. I'm going to see if something doesn't happen in the next 10 or 20, 30 minutes where things turn out. Because that bull in Montana was, walking right to left, coming kind of at a diagonal. It's very possible that bull would have passed within 30 yards of me. And 30 yards in that wind, I'm very comfortable with. 60 yards in that wind is another ball game.
Yeah.
And so I'm okay. I'm okay now with the idea. Like, I'm much more aware of my limitations as well. And I said this the other day in our Buck Fever podcast. I've dropped arrows at 90 yards with broadheads 100, like consistently. Before I went hunting this year, I was dropping them. I dropped just a couple with broadheads in your elk target in the back that you're not supposed to shoot at with broadheads. But
I may or may not have cursed you when I saw broadhead holes in my elk target.
Nate was there too. Nate knows. That was 107 yards, and I'm dropping them in the vitals. Boom, boom. And I was like, this is cool. Like, I'm shooting so well, better than I've ever shot in my life. My range is just being able to make that shot at that distance, broadhead and all of that lets me know, and consistently with groups that I've got some skill and the tuning is good. Mm-hmm. Like the combination together. Sure. It doesn't happen if you're not in that place. But then you go hunting, right? And I haven't done this so much that it's like ingrained in me year upon year upon year. This is still, newfound archery skills that are quickly lost if I'm not shooting every day, or at least frequent enough, And then you add to that you're hunting a live animal.
Yeah.
And there's a whole different level of when I'm out here, chill as can be, relaxed, and I'm drawing my bow back, and my heart is super calm, and I'm just dropping the arrows in. It's a lot different than all of a sudden I've got an adrenaline dump.
Sure.
And I'm like amped, like ready to lift a car off of somebody, right? Like I'm just like, oh, just this excitement is awesome, which is part of the reason why I think my primal DNA drives me to hunt, right? Like there's something about it that is incredible. It's just built into who and what we are. And so I'm at that moment. Well, I've learned that I can't make that go away right now. Like I can't compartmentalize it. The adrenaline is just a byproduct of what I love to do right now.
Yeah.
And just the overall, the heart rate, the everything. And it's just without the calmness that I need, that allows me to shoot a 107-yard shot, I can't make a 107-yard shot. I can't make a freaking 80-yard shot. Like there's a certain amount of stillness and calmness that my body in general, my physiology needs to grant me.
Right.
That I don't have right now. And accepting that as a limitation is an eye-opener for me, because you make it all in these, you're like, I did it under pressure at this 3D thing, and I did it with all these people watching at TAC, and I did it here in your backyard with some buddies talking trash, and it's not the same as when that big animal walks out. You're by yourself. You're assessing this, and you're like, I've realized that the adrenaline is just, it's something I'm dealing with now. And that means that my effective range is completely different than my effective range on a foam target.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that the effective hunting range and what you actually shoot, in practice is two different things. But I'm of the opinion, because I've been able to be successful shooting tournaments and shooting a bow at long distance and in whatever novelty shoots, whatever the case is, right? I've been lucky at some of that stuff. But at the same time, when you take and you break down what is your effective hunting range and you start to squeeze it in and just get a little closer, you start to see animals die in eyesight, right? You put an arrow in an animal and it dies 20 yards away. That's very gratifying. You start to, don't get me wrong. There's something to being able to track an animal, because there's been times where if you aren't practicing at that, then you're not going to find an animal. But there's something to that. But at the same time, I would rather shoot an animal at 25 to 30 yards than 55 to 60 all day long, right? I don't care how good somebody can hold a group at 60 or 80 yards. Man, you put that animal at 25 or 30, and there's so many variables that get eliminated from the scenario. Even the scenario of what a broadhead does when it enters a cavity. I shot a deer in Nebraska that was quartering way hard, and I put that arrow right behind, maybe center body, up and down and left and right, thinking I'm going to blow out the opposite shoulder. Well, ended up recovering the animal the next day. When we were gutting the animal, that arrow never entered the cavity. It hit the front of the last rib, scooted all the way up the rib cage in front of the shoulder, but because the deer was kind of looking over, it poked out its neck. So because it went all the way through and clipped an artery in its neck, it died. Otherwise, that arrow never went in the cavity.
Yeah.
So there's things that come into play based off of your setup that you don't have any control over. What if one blade on a broadhead opens in flight if you have a mechanical? There's just, I said.
We talked about the other day too, and I talked about it with Aaron, and I'm I'm, as much as I shot a lot of blacktails with I've enjoyed hunting with mechanicals like Alaska, Sitka blacktail, and I shot my elk this year, with a mechanical, and I've had great success with mechanical broadheads. But this year I also had some things that just were bizarre, that just ended badly that shouldn't have. And it's like, I've never experienced that before. And the mechanical broadhead, just like where the arrow goes in 3 inches and then falls out, or 2 inches and just comes right back out. It's like, what was that? Like that, I've never seen that before. What was that? And so, back to you talking about setups and changing them, getting your system quieter and things like that. I'm also kind of changing things, and I want to shoot fixed blade going forward. The reliability of it has just been, I just feel so much more comfortable now after having some bad experiences with mechanicals. And not that mechanicals can't get the job done, for sure. But I might use a mechanical on like a bear in thick country, like in Prince of Wales, Alaska, because, an animal goes 50 yards into the bush. It can be really hard to recover if it didn't leave any blood. And 50-yard radius in head high brush is tough to recover an animal on. And if it ran 100 yards, 150 yards and died, it's like, so I'm willing to gamble on the broadhead not performing the way I want on a fixed.
Even in that scenario, though, I may still consider a fixed blade head, and I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. When you look at the scenarios of how many people actually get pass-throughs on animals, right?
Yeah.
Unless an animal is very close to being perfectly broadside, I would say it's a coin toss chance at best if the arrow is going to completely pass through, quartering away, quartering to, frontal, whatever the case is.
Right.
So when you start thinking about an arrow, I don't know if you were to calculate it, maybe 50 to 75% of the time, you're not going to get a pass through. Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh-huh. In that situation, I'm of the mindset of I'd rather shoot a fixed blade head that's gonna, if it stays in that cavity as that animal's moving, it continues to do damage. Yep. As opposed to when you shoot an expandable in that same scenario, and the arrow stays inside the cavity, those blades will fold back over or slip back down, and they're done doing damage.
Yeah.
So that's where when I'm looking at setting somebody up in here that's lighter poundage bows, that's a lady or a kid, mm-hmm. We're trying to put a heavier arrow with cut on contact broadhead, and in some cases, like some of the broadheads that cut on both ends, man, the Ramcats is a nasty looking head. Cuts up, mm-hmm. cuts both ways. Some of the other heads we've had luck with are like some of the Exodus and Strikers, Slick Trick. Some of those heads that they'll continue to do damage.
Yeah. Plus they make 2 holes a lot of times. Like I got pass-throughs with my fixed where I didn't get them with my mechanicals. Yeah. And I should have, like on a few does in Texas, like I expected. It's a small animal, dude. A white-tailed doe is not big. And so I'm like, I'm just migrating toward the fixed blade and just rolling that way. And I've mentioned this before. I've shot Slick Tricks for years. Yeah. And, but this year I shot the Strikers mm-hmm. a bunch.
Good head.
And I just liked them.
Yeah.
I liked how sharp they were out of the box. And dude, they passed through. They got pass-throughs with them. So I like that. And heavier arrow, front of center heavier. I'm moving in that direction as well.
Yeah.
And I want to get, have a little more power when I hit that animal.
Yeah. And I agree, but I just think that there's a place for I shot everything that I hunted with this year with expandables, and I purposely just wanted to test a specific head. But in retrospect and moving forward, I would agree that unless it's going to be the conditions are going to be on a medium-sized game or smaller where it's distance or wind, I'm going to probably always go to that fixed blade style head.
Yeah, and I'm kind of just leaning away from distance altogether.
Yeah.
just because, first of all, I like getting close. I mean, I like the spot and stock aspect of bow hunting. And it's funny when Aaron was shooting his trad bow and he was like, I was never a great archery shot before I met Aaron. I mean, I was okay. But the reason I killed animals because I got close.
Yeah.
It's like, I liked 30 yards and under.
Yeah.
And most of my animals I ever killed were all 30 yards and under. I remember shooting a buck at 45 yards, and that was like, at the time I thought, dude, that is a poke. And it was one of my best blacktails. But I sat there for like 35 minutes while that buck was just kind of grazing and standing there going, I just couldn't see a way to get closer. And I had been trying. And there was this old dead, like, cedar tree that had fallen down in the thick Oregon brush, and it was like 100-foot tall, and it ran diagonal to that buck. And so the wind and the rain and the noise and everything was just right, but I could climb on that log and walk it. And it diagonally took me from like 120 yards from that buck to 45 yards. That's as close as and if I jumped off that log and tried to walk through like neck high brush, first of all, I couldn't see it anymore once I got off the log, and it was just too thick. And so I was like, I sat there for a while, though. Ironically, I look back on this, and I'm like, 45 yards. And I waited, and I drew my bow back a couple of times, and then didn't take the shot, and I ranged it again. I'm like, well, you can make the shot all day long. I had calmed down by that point, given myself some time, and I took the shot with a lot of confidence and punched right through. That shot was like, seemed so far to me. And now that's for me, a gimme shot, even with adrenaline and excitement and everything else, because I have much better archery skills. But when Aaron was doing the trad thing, I was like, he would complain about having to get to 30 yards or 25. And I remember telling him one day, he's like, man, this trad bow thing sucks because it's hard. Like, I got to get to, 30, 25 yards. And I'm like, trad bow, nothing. I've been doing that with the compound, like for as long as I can. Like, my effective. I think a lot of guys actually aren't that good of archers, and getting to 30 yards is just kind of, or 40 yards at least is just sort of the status quo.
That's a whole different topic too, with technology almost making some of us worse hunters. Because the capabilities to shoot distance, the capabilities and the tolerances being tighter to achieve better group sizing and everything. We don't have to get that close anymore. And it's funny because years ago, Colorado used to have in their big game brochure, the rules that would say compound bow, longbow, recurve, or any other type of primitive archery equipment. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at myself, I'm like, there's nothing primitive on a compound bow. There's nothing primitive, So, but there's so much to that because, when you do take the time and you sneak in close, and those scenarios, I'm sure you've done it too, where you're like, okay, there's an animal there that it's not the animal I want to shoot at, but I want to see how close I can get to that animal, and you start putting a stock in and you start moving in and you see how close you can get. And it's unreal sometimes how just that process in itself. And to think that if that was when 20 and 30 yards were kind of like the norm, anything out of 30 yards was, oh, you don't want to shoot out of 30 yards. That's unethical. That's a bad thing to do. And to the point now to where we're at, to where, like you said, and 40 yards chip shot, so it's funny how we evolve, how technology evolves, how everything evolves. But, I'm excited to see where things are in 10 years.
Yeah. Well, that's where I'm like, I'm okay with getting closer and, making that a part of my goal, moving forward, opposed to extending my effective range as far as my shooting ability goes. I still want to improve that as well, but I'm just more inclined to be like just to push that other limit because it's rewarding.
Sure.
The animals that I got too close to and shot those experiences were more intimate and more rewarding to me than the animals I shot at long range and hit well. I shot my elk at 70 yards. It's probably the longest shot I've ever taken or ever, at least successfully, made.
Yeah.
And I was super confident. when I made that shot and I nailed him, and that was a really good feeling. But, yeah, I'm not, that's sort of a space where I don't really want to go very often.
Yeah. It's tough. Like I said, just the uncertainty of things is, and when you're honest with yourself and you start really breaking down what did happen or what could have happened, or what, even a buddy's, hunt or something, and you say, oh, they shot at this distance, and you see what happened. And like I said, the blood trailing or the scenario, man, if you're honest with yourself, there's a lot of times where you sit back and you're like, I never should have shot that arrow.
Yeah.
And, but that's the place that we are, I guess, what do you do? How is that something predetermined? Is there a right or wrong to get to that point?
I don't know.
Neither.
Yeah. I think it's a good discussion to have. And the lessons that we take away from archery hunting, they go into your quiver and you use them in the following year. And each year you get a little better. You start to accumulate some
hunting
experience
instinct
and wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's instinct. And you start to make opportunities happen that you would have failed on
a
few years ago, and that's exciting.
Yeah.
Exciting, to start having more success. They talk about people taking a very long time to kill their first bull elk, right? And then they finally do. And then it starts to create more successes and more successes.
Sure.
And I think that's because of that accumulation of this sort of experience that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I agree. That story seems to follow suit. There's customers that come in and they'll first time hunting, and they'll get set up. They'll be practicing and ready to go, and they'll go hunt, and they'll come in with the stories that whether they encountered elk or not, and then another year passes by, and I got closer, and then I got a little closer. Oh, I got a shot, but whatever the case happened,
yeah.
And then to see somebody just be successful right out the gate, doesn't happen a lot. I don't see.
Yeah.
But that's not saying it's not possible. It's something you got to spend some time with for sure.
Well, archery is absolutely humbling because, I'll see guys from other walks of life get into hunting and get skunked.
Yeah.
For a few years. And they're just like, dude, I am so successful in these sports and in anything I've ever done. And in bow hunting, public land, I just can't make this happen. And, it's humbling. And then there's those guys that somehow, whatever they've gained through life experience, be it in sports or military or something, it immediately applies. And for some reason, they got to figure it out at the outset, and they're successful.
But, so I talk to a lot of hunters that, obviously being based in Denver, there's a lot of hunters from out east that'll message me, I'm going to be going on my first elk hunt this next year. Mm-hmm. Any advice? Or I'm looking to plan an elk hunt next year, and talking about success and everything. I'm of the opinion a lot of those guys should hire a guide or an outfitter their first time out, and why would you not put yourself in as high of a success opportunity that you can? If you've never elk hunted before, there's nothing wrong with hiring a professional guide, a service to take you hunting. I don't feel that way, because it's no difference in hiring a coach or a teacher. It's going to cost you a little bit more money, yes, but will your learning curve be far sped up? 100%. Maybe the next time you come out, you don't need a guide,
right?
But it may take somebody 2 or 3 years to get to that point without that.
And to me, it's a lot different than when you go hunting with a buddy who's been doing it his whole life, who's like a killer.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, you can hunt with me. And you hunt with him for a week, and then you learn a lot in that period, And I think that, I learned a lot from Aaron.
Sure.
We go backpacking and stuff. My backpacking game, backcountry game is on a whole different level than it was when I first met Aaron. And we were still, my buddies and I were still going into the eel cap, like 12, 14 miles wilderness in Oregon. And we were like backpacking in, we were bringing goats or horses or mules. And we were getting it done. We were killing elk. We were packing them out. But I'll tell you what, that taught me a lot. But then going with Aaron took it to another level. I mean, there was just a lot of information that he possessed that I was able to gain that he just had way more time in that space.
Right.
And it sped up my learning curve dramatically. And I think the same is true. Like if you can hunt with somebody who's been elk hunting their whole life, right, and gets it done every year with a bow, you're going to learn some things from those guys. And hiring a guide, it's the same thing. When I went to hunt with Bart Lancaster in BC, British Columbia, with Snyder this year, and we hunted mountain goats, man, watching Bart was just amazing. Like I learned a lot about just, wilderness survival, animal behavior, like philosophy on, being out there, and how he would spot game, our approach. I took away a lot of newfound skills and knowledge because of hunting with that person.
Yeah. No, when I went with Aaron on the sheep hunt, the scouting trip in, and then being in there a couple of days the first time, he was spotting all the sheep before Braden or I would. Yeah. And it's like, man, how the hell did you pick that off? I mean, I didn't see that. It looks like rocks, and then by the third or fourth day, as we're glassing country and looking at stuff, it's like I started to be able to pick off a few animals before he did. And it was just like, okay, I get it now. I'm looking for certain things. I'm looking for certain things out of place, different coloration. And it's not unlike any other type of hunting. It's just, it's its own set of skills with that application. Somebody who's done it many times before is going to speed up your learning curve.
They are.
So it's amazing. And I'm of that opinion. I'm of that school of thought that I would rather look to get coaching, seek for, even if you got to pay for it once or twice to get that.
Yeah.
Help speed up my learning curve.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Well, I want to, make sure Cody Eardley, the guy that wrote the article, Situation Ethics, knows that we weren't bagging on him.
Not at all.
Not at all. Appreciate the article. It's a great article, well written, and it really kind of helped us kind of start a conversation on this.
I got to give him the kudos because he didn't go down the road of my XYZ bow set at 70-some pounds and my XYZ broadhead. Man, he told a great story, and it was like, to the point. It was well written. I agree.
Yep. He didn't even say the broadhead. He said the broadhead company.
Right.
Right?
So, yeah.
Yep.
I agree, man.
I like that. And we had another, I love Bugle Magazine. I think there's some great articles in it, and there's one more in here that Phil and I want to tackle, which is it's article it's page 154, Good Hunting, and on that one, it's Dan Crockett, and he says, "I'm a lifelong gourmand of all our public lands offer, but viewing private landowners as the enemy is asinine." And so we're going to tackle that subject because Phil hunts a lot of public land, but you also hunt a lot of private.
Yeah.
And so does Santino.
Yeah.
And a few other guys around here. Private property is actually something you guys focus on quite a bit too.
So in Colorado, there's specific tags that are allocated specifically to private land.
Yep.
Right. And if you're looking to maximize opportunities in the field, tags in hand, well, you got to look at all options. The high mountain backcountry style hunt, chasing mule deer or sheep. I love that. That is its own game. At the same time, when you start getting into east of the Rocky Mountains and into the plains, and you start looking at river bottom type hunting, mule, whitetail deer, whatever the case is, most of that land is controlled by landowners. Is there some walk-in pieces? Yes, there is. But at the same time, I just feel it's the game, and how's the saying go? Don't
hate the player, hate the game.
Hate the game, right?
Or don't hate
whatever the case is. Right. It's just you got to understand what the cards, how the cards are dealt, and you just got to be able to play them. So whether that means doing some things to get on private property, get a trespass fee, or do some work for somebody. I did some work this year, and that's where I shot my mule deer.
Yeah.
I went out, dug a trench for a guy.
Well, I hunted whitetail, both areas. I hunted whitetail in Oklahoma and Texas. And last year when I hunted in Alabama, all of that was private property.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I want to pick your brain and talk to you about how you find private property, as well as how you find places to hunt on public land, how you kind of go through your process. Because Phil finds some great places to hunt, and he's, like I said, he's not just locked down to public. He's analyzing both private and public land opportunities, and I think it's a beneficial discussion. So we'll tackle that next time we're on the podcast.
There's a lot to talk about there, and it's an interesting topic because there's some negative stigma that goes with certain aspects of that, which I think are unjust in the most part, and for the most part.
Well, dude, thanks for coming on the podcast again.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah.
Always a good time.
For folks that are, in the Denver area, make sure you check out No Limits Archery and the classes online. They can register for classes. I was in one last night, learned a ton of new stuff. Yeah. You're offering those for people, and I think it's an excellent. It's cheap. It's a chance for you to learn a little more about how to set up your arrows, your bows, and tune, and just be more successful.
Yeah, we'll open up the January, February schedule soon. So depending on when you listen or watch, we'll be updating a couple months in advance.
Yeah,
the schedule. So it's a lot of fun, man. I love interacting with people. Last night had a couple class clowns in their 50s.
That's right.
So it was a good time.
It was fun.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Phil.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
Stay gritty. In 1907, only 41,000 elk remained in North America, and in 1950, only 12,000 pronghorn remained. Today, there are more than 1 million elk and 1.1 million pronghorn. Why? Because hunting is conservation. In 1937, hunters actually requested an 11% tax on guns, ammo, bows, and arrows to help fund conservation. That tax so far raised more than $8 billion for wildlife conservation. Altogether, hunters pay more than $1.6 billion a year for conservation programs. No one gives more. It's obvious that hunters care about animals, and yet we actively hunt and kill them. Many people cannot understand this dichotomy. How can we both care about animals and also kill them? It's a question that I challenge all of you to consider. We can argue as much as we like, but the fact is, hunting is man's oldest and most successful try at life. Every human being is alive today because our ancestors hunted. So it's a relatively new phenomenon for people to regard hunting as a cruel and frivolous activity that has no worth outside of personal gratification for the hunter. The funny thing is, hunting has increased my appreciation for wild animals and wild places, not decreased it. And as I watch society lose its ties to wildlife and conservation, I feel my bond with nature grow ever stronger in direct correlation to my time spent hunting. I understand now more than ever that hunting is the greatest hope for creating the next generation of true conservationists. Never stop sharing your passion for hunting in the outdoors. Our wild animals and wild places depend on it.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
Gritty Bowman.